Okay, so a couple things. Somebody asked me what the definition of done. Was that Zach?
That was me, yeah.
Did I answer that with everybody? I started writing.
Everyone but Josh.
Yeah,
I wasn't here.
Oh, okay. Anyways, I started writing a page about that to define that better. Okay, so Sean's not here for our Sean time, so that's great. Okay, two things I wanted to address. First thing is coming into Zach, he was asking about UI, like what level of UI. So he's making a new system, right? So he's got this new system and he's like, okay, what about the UI? Where do I stick this? And I said, well, I'll stick it to the character sheet. And he's like, yeah, but Sean is also sticking his thing on the character sheet. So now we go from 6 tabs to 8 tabs. And I don't think it's going to look very good. And like, maybe I have to find another solution. And I was like, don't worry about it. Just stick it on the character sheet and we'll just have as many stupid buttons on there. If it goes 15 buttons all the way across, it doesn't matter, because at some point, Joel will do a UI pass on this game. I got to figure out how to find the money to pay Joel, but Joel's going to do a UI pass. So if we have bad UX for this game, I'm totally fine with that. Yes, we're going to have people playing it, but I'm not going to sweat and spend time trying to figure out how to make a good temporary UI. So I thought that was important for everybody to know. Next thing, which has come up from every person that I've talked to, is I'm going slower than I wanted to on my task. I think James is the only one who's going at the speed he wants to. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm slow too. I feel slow.
Okay, good. So that is why I said I don't care about the time estimates. I mean, it gives you an idea of what we thought it would be. But at this point, for ramping up on the project, which is new to everybody, really, that's why I gave you one simple task, which Zach decided not to do and just go for the hard one. Still don't know why I made that decision, but anyway, whatever time you see allotted to a particular task, I expect it's going to take double, maybe even triple. But the short answer is I just don't care. I just want to get going, and you want to get going, and we're just going to get going. And it takes a lot of time in order to learn a new project. And Archmage is harder. I have it right here on my wall. Josh can attest. It's right here. I have a little sign to remind me when I'm feeling the way that people have said they're feeling. I just look at my little sign that says, game dev is hard, Archmage Rises is harder. Okay, so I can give you a copy of this sign if that'll help you. You can stick it up on your wall right behind your monitor like me. So when I'm feeling this way, I go, oh, game dev is hard. Oh, Archmage Rises is harder. So yeah, we have a sprint. We have some stuffs in the sprint. And basically at this stage, we'll see what we get. We do need to be able to plan and have realistic timeframes in the near future, but we don't need that right now. So Ruby, Zach, Tyler, there you go. Now everybody knows. Michael, speed up. I think Sean was also dealing with that. Ruby made a good suggestion. She's like, oh, if Adam is working on Archmage with us, is he coming to stand-ups? Is he coming to Jesus Time on Mondays? And I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. So I invited him. And so we'll see what he says. I don't know about the stand-ups, but he can certainly come to Jesus Time. He is planning to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays full-time on Archmage. So that's, I don't know what other qualifications you need in order to be at stand-up and like whatever. So his plans are to make his own studio. And I think maybe by inviting him in and he can observe and whatever, he can take what's good here and bring that somewhere else, because the way things are at True Play, I don't think there's anything to take there.
Except the money.
Take the money. He says that what he's seen in the past is when somebody gives their notice, they're just like, yeah, you don't come in anymore, because they're so upset. And so I told you Mark and Adam are both resigning today at the same time. They coordinated it. I sent a note to Melissa to see if she could get us a Windows build. So I don't know if anybody's working on the games or not, but if there is someone and they can whip off a Windows build for Melissa, she'll give it to us. Because I played the one that Tyler found on the Google Drive, and it's real old. It doesn't even have the Sling Quest picture in it. It's buggy. It's like all the things that we solved in the last week are not in it. So it's like not very playable. So at this point, I would just record from my phone, and it's just non-interactive. Okay, I think that covers it. Does anybody have any questions or stuck on anything?
I have a design question again.
Okay.
Maybe specifically environments. I'm working with the environment stuff and temperature and weather and moisture, and me and Thomas talked about how he was wanting the environment to change with moisture levels. So that makes total sense to me. Just I'm coming across a couple issues. Currently, the game treats hills, mountains, tropical, grasslands, water, and lakes all as the same thing. They're all considered an environment. But to me, it seems like a hill or a mountain is more of a feature than an environment in that sense. So I'm wondering like how we're supposed to be, how you guys would think that should be split out. Like, does a hill degrade into like a grassland or something based off of a moisture level? Or like what happens to a town when you go from like grassland to ocean, right? Like, does the town get destroyed completely, and what goes on from there? And stuff like that. Because there's could be a lot of destructive consequences for the changing of environments. And I'm not sure exactly where and how you were looking for that to be applied.
What's the gameplay purpose behind moisture level? Is that primarily rain? Is that what we're talking about, rain and humidity as the moisture level, or is that trying to determine something else?
Go ahead.
Like if rivers form.
My understanding is it's a moisture quantity in like a piece of land. So like a swamp environment has more moisture in the land itself than plains.
Okay, it's not.
So like it's like you imagine the gameplay feature that Thomas was suggesting was like you have a spell, you create like a rainstorm in a hex, and if you have that rainstorm for 3 months, eventually that hex is just going to be so waterlogged it'll turn from
okay.
like plains to swamp, and maybe eventually becomes like a body of water, like an ocean or a lake. Or you could dry it out with like
that's cool
heat spell or something.
Yeah.
Does this play into rivers, or is that just elevation? I can't remember.
There's no rivers in that. So there's a thing called sub-environments, which is just another enum, but I don't really know what else that's really doing or what that's all tying into exactly. Like from what I see, that's just like you have a red desert, green desert, not green, like a red desert, a yellow desert. You have a cold desert. You have all of these different types of deserts. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's like, it's not really a feature system. Like you also have like landmass types. So there's like a town is on this spot, or you have a wizard towers on this hex, or I think a road is on there as well. I think our roads, I'm not sure. I haven't found exactly where they are in all of this.
So couple of things. When in doubt, look to Civ 6. So in Civ 6, you have a hill is a feature of a plain or of a grassland. A forest is a feature on a hill, or on a grassland, on a plain. So that's first thing. Second is you should probably take a look at the map section of the design document. So there's I've only assigned you 2 of the map things, but if you go in, you'll see lava flows and river flows and whatever. And looking at the whole context might give you an idea of like, oh, this is how I'm going to have to implement that. So take a look at the big picture.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I guess then a question is like, by me going through this, the current system is not well suited for adding in moisture and changing these kinds of things. Like, are we good to like refactor a lot of this like environment and sub environments and features and stuff like that at this point?
Yeah, the game code is not sufficient. It is not
Okay.
what is needed. So yeah,
Okay.
almost every feature that is listed in the document requires significant changes to the code.
Okay.
That's writing new code, changing existing code, expanding out, extending code. Yeah.
Perfect. Because this 1-day task is turning into a lot of work. So
You've been taking a page out of Michael's book.
Hey, I just blame Archmage.
Okay,
Archmage is harder.
That's right. Okay. Good. Anything else? No.
Not for me, no.
I invoiced Shara, so that's nice. It's like the old days. Okay, and we'll move on to CodeCraft.
All right, so I'll leave then. Thank you for clarifying like the time stuff.
Yeah, was there a little bit at the beginning of CodeCraft that we were to stick around for? I thought I saw a note about that, or is that?
We just had it.
We just had it, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, have a good time, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you. See ya.
Very short there, Josh.
Yeah, he doesn't like
sitting down.
aiming his thing.
It always just bounces back up. Like it's on a screw that's loose, so it just boing.
Oh no.
Oh, what?
Okay, sharing my screen. Okay. So today I want to talk about 2 simple things, and this one still took me 2 hours to prepare and put together. So I don't know. I don't know why it takes so long. It just does. Okay. So the first thing to remember always, and I'm going to keep saying it, I think every time, is that we're programming for others, right? So just want to always drive that home, that we're programming for others. So being courteous to the person that's coming behind. So when it comes to naming your variables, we want intention revealing names. So you can see in the bad naming example, right? H doesn't tell me anything, but hours since modifications or elapsed hours and days or something obviously has a lot more behind it. They always start with lowercase, so that's called camel case. That differentiates it from a property. So properties are always uppercase. So if I'm hitting dot and I see first name, or I see name, I immediately know that's a property, and it's probably joining a first name and a last name together just because it's capitalized. Okay, so that's why it's so important that you have lowercase for variables and uppercase for properties.
In Archmage, everything's a property at the moment, but it's all lowercase names because they're really just like regular variables. They're
Yes,
just properties so that the serialization engine can grab them.
because
So-
serialization engine can only handle public properties. It can't save privates. So that's why it's done that way. So that's why I see every single variable as a getter and setter on it. Okay, so when you're naming a variable, like why does this thing exist? These are the questions to ask yourself. Why does this thing exist? What does it do? And how is it used? And that's how you can come up with hopefully a useful name for the next person. Obviously, clarity is king, and the length of the name indicates its importance. So when you see my code and you see some get component that is equal to some geo equals some get component or whatever, the fact that it's a GO or an E tells you that it is not important. This is like when you're reading a novel and they don't even give you the name of the character. They're just like, oh, so-and-so, there's a man walking down the street and he had a red dog, right? It doesn't give you the name of the character because it's not important who they are. So when you see those short little letter ones, that's what you're indicating. And so, of course, we know that when you're looping, that's what I is for, and then J. And then if you're really crazy, then K. So if you're all the way up to K, something's probably wrong. But anyways, it is possible. Okay. Any questions, comments on variable names?
Not really. I'd use, what are your thoughts on using like temp for like temporary? Like that's very specific.
It's fine. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just telling Michael, I'm never going to change from using E's and H's and T's for my temporary variables. So
I am always confused every time I see it, and then I have to figure out which one it is, and then I'm always lost. I'm happy with I. Like there's certain ones where the letter has gained on new meaning. So I and GO all have a meaning which has been acquired, but E does not. Now, depending on the scope of it, if it really is just a for loop or for each or something and it's 2 lines, maybe it doesn't matter. It still just makes my, I dislike the visual look of it, I think is probably the biggest thing. But it just like, I don't know, it always feels wrong, which is why I never do that.
Geo always confuses me because I'm wondering if it's referencing movement, and I've seen it do both sometimes. And then I'm like, I'm not sure if this is game object or moving to something or what it's referring to.
I can tell you for certainty in Defiance on Archmage, it's never movement. It's only ever game object.
Yeah, I think that when it's something like a character go, I'm like, where's the character going to? Or things like that. And I'm like, it's harder for me to register and read.
So it sounds like by importance in this context, are you meaning like scope size? Like if it has a short name, then it's just like you're not using it very long, so you don't have to pay any attention to it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a hint that this thing is only ever going to be used once. Right.
And I think that also ties into like how much you need about it. So if you're only going to be using this in a small scope and where you defined it is pretty close to where it's being used, then you know what it is. But if this was defined like 3 pages ago, you're like, I don't remember what this is. So you need extra information to convey, what was this again? That's how I've heard that described.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I know I've written code that like gets the game object, and then so it's GO equals this, and then it's go.get component in order to get the script that I want on it. And that's the thing I actually care about, right? So the first thing is just whatever, it's a throwaway.
I guess, I was going to say, there are a lot of cases where it feels harder to make variables shorter when they're less important, because in a lot of cases they're there because there's something very specific. And so I'm like, if I shorten this, then I feel like it's not going to make any sense what it is, but then it's 3 words or 4 words long. And so I guess I feel like I've always had the opposite problem of the most clear and important things that are always there are pretty easy. Like it might be, hey, here's a reference to a game object. And then the things that are deeper in the code are more specific and harder to explain with just a single letter or 2. So I'm not really sure. I like the idea, but I'm not sure how I would actually implement that in a useful way without creating more confusing code.
For me, it comes down to like the scope. So like if you have hours since modification, that could be a great name for something that's used as a property or used in a larger state or something. But if you just have a time that's doing something with hours, you might not need the since modification, but you might just be able to have hours there. So I think maybe it goes the other way around. So you increase the length of the name if it's going to be around for longer, or if it's going to be used in lots of different places. Not always a great idea. That's what comments are there for too. But
yeah. So many times I've written code where there's a number of choices and then I for each it. So I'm for eaching some choices, and then I what do I call it? I call it C for choice, because it doesn't matter. And then I'll go C dot and then the actual property that I care about, and that's what I show in the text on the screen or something like that. So yeah, longer names, not like long, but 2 or 3 words for things that matter, and a single letter for something that doesn't matter at all. And I'm not telling you that you have to do single letters for things that don't matter at all. I'm saying it's a way of indication when you're looking at my code anyway, that's what that means. And so if you want to write out game object, go ahead. I don't care. I'm not telling you have to use GO. I'm telling you what GO means when you look at a code base. And so usually, you just grab the first letter of something. If it's a combinational thing, like game object is 2 words, so it's GO. If it's, I don't know what the other thing is.
KVP is pretty common.
KVP?
Key value pair. I've seen you use
Oh,
that before.
yeah, that's
Other
right.
people do that one.
Yeah, exactly.
But-
Yeah.
Or
The short form for
Sometimes.
dictionary is not appropriate. That's a programming joke. Okay. So class design and naming. So it's bad to have something so generic like data. It's good to have something like game state. So you always start with a capital, Tyler, noun or noun phrase. So you would never start with a verb. Reject or pull request if I see a verb.
what about for a command object? Or not, was it command? Yeah, I think it's the command pattern allows you to create a class that's doing a thing rather than.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just.
Always looking for the exception. Always looking for the 0.1%.
I'm always on the edge case.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Whatever.
Sorry.
Okay.
We just say never, and we are programmers. So just saying.
I was doing an if else when really it's a switch, Thomas, with a default state. Okay. So this came up with Zach, so I want to talk about the common solution. So if your instance uniqueness is important, use the utility.nextID instead of a string. So he was working on a knowledge system. He has pieces of knowledge. So this is my first kiss. This is, I went to a seminar and they said something interesting about fire magic, whatever. So he has to like store these things and they are unique things. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to have a string with the title of the thing. And that's how we're going to compare on. I'm like, no. So usually you want to do things by reference, right? That's the preferred solution, right? So you have this piece of knowledge and the player wants to do something like they want to write a letter. Sorry, they want to write a poem. So they want to write a poem. And in order to write a poem, you have to utilize a piece of knowledge from the knowledge system. So then it pops up the knowledge system and you pick your piece of knowledge. And so you would click on first kiss. Okay, so that closes out the UI. And now we have a reference to that piece of knowledge, right? We don't need an ID number because if we had an ID number, then we just have to go and find the object again anyways, right? So you would not use an ID number. You would use a reference. But there are situations where a reference is not appropriate or you don't have it or can't have it or whatever. In that case, then you're like, what do I do? The answer is it's already a solved problem. You use utility.nextID and it gives you a unique ID across the entire game. I think that's the next thing. Yeah, guaranteed across the entire game instance. There will never be a torch that has an ID similar to your knowledge thing because it's a forever increasing number. So basically the number is, just happens to be which the 100th item has an ID of 100. That's the answer. So they're always unique. And when we save the game and we load the game, we save and remember that state. So you're always getting unique IDs as you go on. So as you're working on things, if you need an ID, there you go. When you're naming classes, it's parent child. Okay, so that way in the code view, similar things are together. So for instance, all the recipes are together, even if they weren't in a folder, which they are, but it just allows you to do that. Now, I'm not enforcing that you have to put the parent thing in front of it. I'm saying if you are putting the parent thing in the name, you put it first, and then whatever your child thing happens to be. So in Zach's case, it would be knowledge, romance, knowledge, magic, knowledge, religion. That's how it'd be, and it'd be nicely sorted in something. Now, it's super crazy, stupid, annoying. So when you go and you look at a torch is a torch. It's not item torch, item bandage, item whatever, right? So I'm not saying you have to do that, but sometimes it's helpful. Like for instance, we have actions that are used as part of the sequencer and stuff, our sequences. So it's nice to see, oh, those things belong with the sequencer. Like it's really clear and easy to see that. And so that's why you see those things. Because if he just names it religion and he names it magic and he names it romance, who knows what that thing is, right? Like you might be looking at it and we're like, how does this do the romance actions? It doesn't. It's a piece of knowledge about romance, right? So that's why you would stick the thing on it, because it increases clarity. In the case of a torch and a bandage, I don't think it increases clarity at all to say item torch.
I have another story about how I got confused, and that was, I'm trying to remember if there was a spell that was similarly called torch, but I was like, is torch and I know that you talked about classes should not be verbs, but like with spells where it's fireball or different things, I was like, is torch a fire spell? Or is torch an item, or things like that, where I've been kind of like, well, I could see it working either way. So actually, yeah, torch is an example that confused me. And I think
That's
there
fine.
were a few items as well. I guess, what do you think about it being inconsistent? Because the thing is that if we have half the items starting with item and half of them not, that seems in my mind really confusing. And not
yeah, that's really confusing. That's really terrible. So that's a case where you have to refactor and make them all the same.
Yeah, because
Things that I wouldn't want you to have item, gear, torch, because I'm pretty sure torch is a type of gear as well.
Yeah,
So I don't know how that would play out.
yeah. We don't need the hierarchy in the name.
like just the base class item torch would be fine.
Yeah, again, this is a suggestion, not a rule. So, but it should be consistent. We should be following the same thing, which I think is the next thing. Yeah, so there's the example of knowledge magic versus magic knowledge. So yeah, we just need to be consistent. So the first thing is to look at what's there. And this is the really hard part to what Tyler was asking earlier. So, okay, so I'm looking at what's there. Should I be respecting what's there or disrespecting what's there? And the answer is, it depends. Yeah, that's the answer. And so you're really going to have to ask specifics, right? Because there's Nick code in here from 7 years ago. Nick didn't care about a lot of things. He cared about going quickly. Daniel code in here, he didn't care about a lot of things. He cared about going quickly. I cared more about consistency and going kind of slower, more methodically. I think Michael cares a lot more about going slowly and methodically. So,
but you will find examples of me going the other way, because I disagreed with Thomas. And it was only when he and Daniel ganged up on me that I accepted using this terrible convention.
I disagree that it's terrible. I like it.
I know.
I want to enforce it more than Thomas wants to enforce it. So
all I'm saying is you will find code of mine which went child parent, because that's human readable and I like it. It doesn't parse as nicely for file structures, but that's what folders are for. But anyway, I will use the parent child in most of my code nowadays, but it just makes me die inside.
Well, I'm glad to know that.
Die inside, Michael.
I'm glad to know that Michael is on my side, even if we're wrong.
All of my side projects will use magic knowledge.
There you go. Okay, talk that one to death. Okay, so method naming, it always starts with a capital. It starts with a verb, right? So you don't just have time as the method, you have process time. It's very easy for people to just put time, but you have to come up with a verb that describes what your thing is going to do, so that one day the Copilot thing on Git can write all of our things for us. So you might as well get practicing now. If for that inevitable day, 20 years into your future, you'll be really good at that. Use the problem domain names. So there are things, for instance, if you're doing a bubble sort, then you call it bubble sort, right? If you're doing there's this amazing trick that I learned from listening to a podcast. It's like 2 lines of code, 1 line of code, and it's a binomial randomization. So when you get a binomial, you get some random number between 0 and 1. When you multiply that times another binomial, what you get is a bell curve. That's like amazing to me. You just take 2 binomials, multiply them together, you get a bell curve. So that's how you can do weight distributions on something. So very few on the low end, very few on the high end, lots in the middle. So what is it? It's a binomial random, right? As opposed to a bell curve, right? Like, so you would, if it has a proper term, then you would use the proper term. So bubble sort and binomial random. Okay, great. Okay, let's say those things don't apply. Then the answer is you use the domain name, the domain space. So cast in an RPG means a very specific thing in a role-playing game, right? But it's not clearly not programmer cast. And so you'll see cast and miscast. And obviously, if you didn't know the problem space, you'd be like, what is this for? Air handling, right? Clearly not. But that's okay. That's to be encouraged, because the more that the player view of the game is reflected in the code, the easier it is for everybody. Because universally, we should understand what the player is trying to do. And I have no idea what the programmer is trying to do. So coming at it from a player perspective, from the domain perspective, makes sense. And Josh is going to complain now.
I was thinking about complaining or holding it. I guess it's a bit different, because what I've seen with some of the code is where it's written based on the design rather than what makes the most sense for the data. So for example, having to refactor character data because monsters are completely separate, but they need some of the traits of characters. And so now we've got like battle objects that have characters, and then characters that might have a battle object associated, and it gets kind of wonky when it seems like if it was just all of these are characters or something like that, and then battle object is representation or different things like that, we could have had cleaner data. That's different from player representation, but I've seen code where it's based on the design thinking rather than what makes the most sense to group. And it seems like that causes more problems and keeps us from having as many dynamic choices in Archmage as we could.
The one you have identified is a big problem, the character battle object or whatever, because it was like, oh, cool, we could just throw on a character and we get all this HP stuff and whatever, when really this should have been something that was kind of refactored out. There's like a smaller piece that battle object could use, but that didn't happen. And so, you're inheriting a code base.
Sure.
So next project, next project, you get to start from scratch. So for instance, you can call something die, right? So on character, there's character.die. And what do you think character.die would do? Well, it
casts a die, throws some dice.
Casts a die. I like that verbiage. Previous one too.
It throws away their HP. If their HP happened to be above 0, then it like puts it down to 0. If it was in the negatives, it sets it to 0 as well. It drops the body to the ground. So whatever that means to the game, but it creates a body object and drops it to the ground and has the associated race and whatever to the body. And so that's what I'm saying is like die makes a lot of sense within this, as opposed to, I don't know, process death or process end state or something, where maybe it is technically processing an end state, but within the domain of this game, it makes sense to die. So craft makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so we want to pick one abstract concept and stick with it. So fetch, retrieve, and get all mean the same thing. So we should use one term for fetching, retrieving, and getting. And the answer is we use get. So
yes.
There you go. So it's get, whatever it is. It's not fetch first name or fetch name or fetch fish or whatever. It's a get. And don't be cute. Kill isn't as clear as delete or remove when you're looking through the code. So you have something that's affecting a list, and you could be killing an option from the list because, come on, kill and remove, that's like the same thing. So yeah, don't be cute about it. Just be clear. Okay, so here's some examples. So the top one, post data, is bad because it's unclear. Like, I don't really know what's going on there. And the bottom one, send to Twitter, is very, very clear as to what's happening.
Just to check, it looks like these are all supposed to be methods
Yeah.
because they're all classes right now. So I was like, wait,
No, they're not.
okay.
No, those are empty methods.
Those
Oh,
are
you're right.
just
Why are
doing
they
nothing.
colored
No
green?
ops.
What do you mean, why are they colored green? That's the
Thought
color they
that,
are.
There's no return value.
For me, they're yellow. Oh, okay.
I
Yeah,
think
it is
you
weird
need
that there's no
void
Yeah,
for it to
yeah,
technically be a
that
method.
looks like a class call, like constructors. That's not, those aren't methods. They would need to have some return value or void.
Actually, it took it. It never underlined it or anything. It was just assumed void, I guess, in the latest version of C#.
I'm not sure what's
Anyways,
going
they're
on with that.
methods.
That seems wrong, but I know what you're trying to do.
Okay, let's focus on what I'm trying to do. So post data is so completely generic. I have no idea what's happening, but send to Twitter is very clear on what is going to happen when I do this. Now, I will also say post data could be actually be what you're doing. Like you've got some data, and inside of post data, you're sending to Twitter and you're sending to Facebook and you're sending. So like, I get that that's not the best of examples, but anyways, one is very generic and one is very clear about what's happening. Next is fetch first name. So we have a dictionary, for instance, that has all of the names. I spent a lot of time converting a naming PDF file into, I guess, an XML file that we could then have all of these medieval names, and we have them by frequency, we have them by sex, we have them by level. Like if you're a noble, then these are the kinds of names that you would most likely have. We have common, uncommon, rares. We have them from different geographies. So these are Welsh names, these are Scottish names, these are Lower England names. So getting a first name is actually a very real situation. You're like, give me a first name, right? So what do? Fetch? No. Small letter G, get? No. It's capital G, get a first name from this dictionary. Don't put a get in front of a property. The property itself defines that it's a getter or a setter or whatever. I don't need you to say get first name and set first name. You don't know how many times I've seen that in the programming tests that people send in. There's more people that have sent in tests than work for the company, obviously, right? So there's like 20 tests that I've had to read, and there's 5 of us here. So somebody thought that was valuable to create a get, blah, 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 and then a set, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the biggest waste of time I've ever seen. So you don't need to do that. You just put first name, getter, and setter, or you actually make your own. And then the dot thing will immediately tell me if it's a read only or a read write value. So you don't have to do that. Always comment your methods with the triple slash, because when you do the top one, then you get nothing for a tooltip. So if I hover over do work, I get nothing. It just says do work. But if I do the triple slash, anything that's in between the summary will show up in the tooltip. So I mouse over it and I get whatever I wrote between those two things. So always document your methods that way. I'm not saying you have to document every method, because I don't think every method needs to be documented. And then the question is, okay, well, which ones need to be documented? And the answer is the ones that need to be documented. Okay. Anything else about thoughts, questions, whatever about, I guess really we're talking about coding conventions here.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about is, when do we use a property versus a method? Is it based on if we want to encourage caching of a value or that sort of thing? Because I've seen some cases where there's a property, but it seems like every time that you run it, it's re-getting the value, and that doesn't seem efficient at all if you're using it like 20 times in a function. But then also sometimes it's like, well, you have a method, and sometimes I'll have one that's a few lines of code and I don't need it that often. So does it just make sense to make it into a property? Is there any sort of convention or thought on that you have?
There is a convention, and that is properties they're just ways of protecting data. So for instance, health is a property, not just for serialization. So like we have a problem in Archmage where everything's a property. So we'll put that aside. Health is a property on purpose, because if you get health and the health is negative, we set it to 0 before sending it back, right? So you use a property in order to correct your data, massage your data before sending it back. And the same thing for data coming in. So your maximum health might be, well, it doesn't matter what your maximum health is. So let's say you're trying to set the health on a character. It can check to see, oh, is this number higher than maximum health? Yes, fine. I'll just set the health to maximum health. So it's not possible for the player to cheat by being down 1 health, drinking a health potion, and then their health is now 50 above what their maximum health is, right? So you use properties for that to be able to correct data. You want to interrupt and get in the way of the person getting at your actual data. Otherwise, you would just have a public variable that people could access, right? But you're like, no, I want to protect my data a little bit. The rule is you never write any code that can fail inside of a getter and setter. So properties can never have code that fails. And so that means it doesn't go to any kind of external third party, anything, whether that's an API like a database, or you're trying to stream something over the internet, or something internal where you're reaching out to game and expecting game to have some kind of state or something, and it doesn't. And then the thing is, so you only do tiny little things in a property. Everything else is a method.
Okay.
Excellent question. Josh,
You talked about
CodeCraft.
you talked about classes being named as a noun and methods being used as a verb. One thing I've heard along those lines is that when you have like a Boolean variable or a Boolean method, you tend to try to preface that with something to say is, or you turn it into a preposition, I guess is the right way to. So you have has or is or does or whatever it is to make it so you don't just have exists, you have does exist or something like that.
Right. Good point. So that the true is in the affirmative, if that makes sense, because you could have it where the false is the affirmative, and that's very confusing. So we have that, like, is male, you get false. It's like, okay. So we can have 2 different ones, is male and is female. And then it's like in the affirmative, that's like more clear. But
I think that was the source of the bug I fixed yesterday, because there's a method that was called something like hide show title bar or something like that.
yeah,
And then you pass in a Boolean. It's like, well, is it hide or is it show? Like, so
that totally sounds like Nick code. He loves to do that. Okay. Yeah, good point. Thanks, Michael. I forgot about that. Okay, let's talk about pair programming for a little bit, because I saw some and I saw an issue. So pair programming has a driver and a navigator. So what is the driver? The driver is the person who knows what to do most. Like, I know what to do right now. So that's the person who drives. As they're driving, they talk through what they're doing. So this seems very natural for Josh, who just loves to stream. They
all heard me talking when I was working through stuff on Monday.
Yeah. So for others, that's a little more of a challenge because you're used to just sitting and typing, but you have to say what it is you're doing. Otherwise, the other person's like, I have no idea what he's thinking or what's coming next or anything like that. It's hard to assist if you're just watching. So the driver is the person who knows best what to do. So this is a situation I saw with Josh and Sean. It's sort of Sean's task that he was doing this packaging, and Josh was coming in to assist. And so Josh was letting Sean do it. And then Josh says, okay, well, you need to get the object and do this. And Sean says, I don't know how to get the component. It's been a while for me to do that in Unity. And Josh is like, oh, okay, then you type blah, blah. As soon as you get to that, you are clearly the wrong person's driving. Okay, so Josh should have been driving. That's the moment when it should have switched over. And so that's what I guess is great about the Visual Studio Live Share. I mean, it's already great. It takes 6 gigs of your memory. But the other thing that's great about it is that it can allow people to switch who's driving without a lot of clicking between the video software. I don't even know if Zoom lets you like give control or something. Maybe it does, but or Discord. I mean, does Discord allow you to give control? I don't think so.
No.
I feel like the other approach you could do is Parsec.
Yeah, that's right. I have something to say about Parsec at the end. Don't let me forget. So that's why the Visual Studio Live Share is so great, because Sean's like, oh, I know this part because I've been working on this packaging stuff for so long. Like, I know what to do here. But then when it comes to something that's very Unity specific that Josh happens to know better, Josh can immediately start typing and getting it in. Now you guys are going well. What I saw was, and I wasn't even there that long. What I saw was some excruciating, no, type this and now dot and then like bracket. No, the other kind of bracket, like that kind of thing, right? It's like, that's why the person who knows best drives and the other person observes. Okay. So what is the navigator doing? Because it sounds like they're not doing anything. They're getting paid to just sit and watch code be written, which I guess is kind of cool. It's kind of like watching the Matrix screensaver where just code is just going down. So they observe and they ask questions. And the asking questions can literally be like, I don't know, like, I don't understand what you're doing, like, teach me kind of questions. It could be, have you considered this, right? So because they're not driving, they're kind of maybe looking further ahead. They're like, isn't that going to have a problem with the XYZ, right? And the person driving, like, oh yeah, you're right, right? So that's what the navigator is doing. They're like considering all the other things. And then this next one is they're also the researcher. So you might be doing something and it's like, oh, I can't remember how to whatever. It's the navigator is like on the Google and picking up the whatever from Stack Overflow and like, oh, it's like this. Oh yeah, great. Okay. And then you're like back at it. And then also asking the external questions. So let's say Josh is driving and they run into something or they're about to run into something. You're like, oh, I'm not really sure about that. Sean can then reach out to me or Tyler or Michael to find out about that. And then Josh is still programming and Sean is like, oh, Michael says that you have to do it like this. Oh, okay, great, right? And so now you're really paired up and doing something. One person isn't just watching the other person. Don't micromanage, right? So that's the example. Okay, and then once you're done your pair programming, you celebrate with a donut or whatever
I want this
high five or whatever the effective alternate is. And so this is an engineer that celebrates every life accomplishment with a donut. And so she has a webpage dedicated to this is the life event and this is the donut that I enjoyed at that life event. So
can we make this a company ritual or something?
Policy?
Like,
yeah.
I don't think there are any donuts on the island. I've never seen one.
Yeah, there's not really donuts on the island. This is possible. It just requires some planning.
Get Tim Hortons to ship some stuff our way every week, or depends how often we want to celebrate. I'm happy celebrating more. I think we should create a culture of more celebration and more donuts.
Yes. So it's possible to freeze donuts, right? You just get donuts and freeze them, and then you can bring them out, and then you have a donut.
Or you can just make them.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work heating up the oil. It's
the pair programmer could make the donuts.
When we're done, I'll have the donuts ready.
That's their additional task.
And then ship it from New Zealand.
Yeah,
as the case may be.
Put a Ziploc, it'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
$75 to air freight this to New Zealand. Okay. What are the benefits of pair programming? There's a number of them, and right now it's a good time for it because everybody is new. There's, I would say, 2-ish people that are familiar with the code base, and there's 5 people that are working on it. So it's good because you have knowledge sharing, right? So I'm sure that Sean picked up a number of things from Josh as he was like driving, right? So so there's that basic level of knowledge sharing. There's a code review on the go. So it's like, no, you can't do that because of this and this, right? And it's like, oh yeah, okay. So that's great. Obviously you have two modes of thinking, like different, two sets of eyes on things, or two different ways of possibly implementing it. You can choose the best between the two of you. The last one over on the side is keeping the work in progress low. That is a project management term that is Jira and Agile and Kanban are all trying to keep work in progress low, which means unfinished work. The amount of unfinished work, so something that's been started and never completed, is low. So if you have pair programming, it's very likely that you're finishing one set task than to just work on something and then get pulled off into something else and it just sits there unfinished and such. So so it leads to higher quality. There's usually less errors and better team flow. You don't feel alone as you're working on this thing. So I think that's a big benefit. So this was a very quick talk about pair programming. All I'm giving is some things to think about when it comes up, when you're like getting help from somebody and stuff. This is not, how does pair programming look at Defiance? Because I have no idea how that looks. I think we need more data and definitely more time to think about it. Maybe we don't.
I think one thing with pair programming is it's not as helpful when you have two very unequal people working on a problem.
Yeah.
When I was doing stuff with Raoul, it was not pair programming. You're not getting any of those, hey, have you thought about this moments? Because he's just trying to figure out what in the world am I doing?
Yes.
Or I was trying to pull Zach in the other day to look at some of the fact stuff, but I just knew so much more about it. And I was having trouble getting the information to him in a way that was helpful. So I don't know. That's just my one concern with pair programming right now, where I'm like, if you're unequally yoked, it just doesn't seem to be effective. I don't know. That, or there's a better way to do it.
I guess one of the things that I think of with that is there's a big difference between programming level and between knowledge level. And
Correct.
so I would think that if it's a knowledge level difference, as far as the code base, like knowing the code base, then that's extremely valuable. Because if there's a lot of confusion from one person, then you need to have those conversations, or else they're just going to be confused when they inevitably have to work with the code someday. And hopefully you can resolve those sooner. But if it's a programming experience one, then and you're answering questions all the time, I guess that's a case where the person who is not driving sort of needs to not ask as many questions and could go overboard on that. But that's probably something that everybody needs to balance and just check in the moment and be like, well, what works here? Because maybe this does need to be more of a teaching time, and that's really valuable.
Yep.
That is really valuable. I think the Raoul example is quite extreme. Raoul's not here anymore.
Correct.
Because of that. So like Tyler is straight out of school as of May of last year, right? Sean isn't even done. I actually thought he was. He tricked me. I thought he was done in February because he's like, oh, I got to do this paper or something. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. But anyway, effectively, he's done. And then Zach, you've been doing game dev for 5 years. So that's a lot of disparity in programming knowledge, right? But I think Zach working with Tyler is still cool and fine because Tyler understands how to program.
Yeah, I don't think the Raoul problem is going to be a problem we have now that Raoul's not with us. But also, it's just I'm coming back from my days at school as well, where there were just a lot of people who just didn't understand. And so it wasn't just a code-based problem. It was like don't understand the code. But again, I don't think we have an issue here. And even though there is a wide variation in skill level, I think we've all passed the useful threshold on that sort of thing.
The most valuable thing for the team is to level up Tyler and Sean.
Yep.
Sorry, Tyler.
That's fine.
Level up.
I know for myself, like if I'm ever like doing pair programming, I generally speaking, I'll always actually try and Google something first before asking, Because I know that more than likely there's either documentation or an answer already online that I don't need to necessarily bother whoever I'm with. Because the internet's a great resource and you can get a lot of answers really quickly on it. So that's definitely something to like for myself that I really try and utilize that tool that exists. So
Yeah.
to help.
Okay, that's all I have for CodeCraft.
Cool.
Helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was good. And getting everybody more on the same page with some of the naming conventions and such. I know that
Yeah.
you mentioned that we're using get for getting, but I've wondered about other types of names as well, or if there are other things other than get that we need to be more consistent on. And like I'm trying to think of
Set.
yeah, I guess to to be honest, like I can't think of any good examples right now, so maybe it's a non-issue.
Well, if it comes up, we can put it on the coding style wiki that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm going to stop the recorder and then we can talk about Sean all we want.